everyone. Nice to be presenting to you again. Paul Nixon is my name, and I will be talking to you this afternoon about the organisation of the Territorial Force between its formation in 1908 and its demise in 1921. It hardly seems a month ago that I was talking to you about the missing of the First World War, and now here we are talking about the TF. So we'll crack on. I've got 30 odd slides to go through. Hopefully there'll be something here that you'll find interesting. I will not be taking questions at the end of the broadcast, but I will, as usual, go in, look at your questions afterwards and answer those that I can do. So again, I thank you all for listening and tuning in. Please do feel free to ask questions. If I can answer them, I'll do so. So this afternoon, what we'll be looking at is the birth of the Territorial Force in 1908, the role of the War Office and the county associations, distribution of the Territorial Force, its duties and obligations, terms of service, regimental numbers, which are very important and can provide you with clues about when a man joined up, the impact of the First World War, how the reserve and second line formations were organised. That can often be quite confusing for people, I think, and hopefully I'll explain to you and make it clear how that operated. And then the renumbering of the Territorial Force in 1917, which again can catch some people out, but but once you know how it operated, it can be very useful. So the VF is dead, long live the TF, Volunteer Force, Territorial Force. So in 1907, the Territorial and Reserve Forces Act combined the Volunteer Force and the Yeomanry, and it was henceforth to be commanded by the War Office and administered by local county associations. Up until that point, from 1859 to 1908, the Volunteer Force had done sterling service, including sending out men during the Boer War as part of volunteer service companies to fight alongside regular troops. But it had been organised in a fairly ad hoc way. It had developed, of course, in the time since 1859, but by the time that the Reserve Forces Act came into place, the change was needed, and the War Office wanted more control and more say, and so it unified. Brought the TF, the Territorial Force units and Yeomanry together. The total cost of the Territorial Force was to be met by the central government, and it actually came into effect on the 1st of April 1908. Throughout this talk this afternoon, I'm going to be focusing on Essex, which is my home county. I live in Chelmsford, in a place called Springfield in Chelmsford, which was a separate village at one point. It's now part and parcel of Chelmsford, really. It's been swallowed up like so many little villages outside big towns. But in 1908, the Essex County Association was responsible for administering all these different units here. So starting from with the Essex Yeomanry, so this is in order of precedence actually. So Yeomanry first, Royal Horse Artillery, Field Artillery, Garrison Artillery, Engineers, then the Infantry, Essex and Suffolk Cyclist Battalion to start with in 1908. It was a combined battalion for Essex and Suffolk men. It later just became the Essex. It became the 8th Essex Regiment, and then you've got Army Service Corps and Royal Army Medical Corps as well. So that was what the Territorial Force County Association administered. The Essex County Association administered. And here on the right, you've got what was there previously in the Volunteer Force. So there was no Volunteer Force predecessor for a couple of those units, or for the the Royal Horse Artillery, and there was no Volunteer Force predecessor for some of those ASC units down at the bottom as well. But you can see that there were some predecessors for some of the other units, the RGA Volunteers and the Volunteer Battalions. So the 1st Volunteer Battalion of the Volunteer Force, Essex Regiment, became the 4th Essex Regiment. And that numbering is logical, actually, because it follows on from the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the Essex Regiment, which were the regular battalions. That's for the career soldiers. The 3rd Battalion was or had been the militia, but from 1908 it was the Special Reserve Battalion. And then you had the 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th Essex Regiment numbering afterwards. So that's all very logical. I did some work for somebody recently who initially wrote to me and said, could you research my ancestor who was in the 2nd Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry? And when I looked, I couldn't find any reference for this person, and then I quickly realised that it was a 2nd Volunteer Force battalion. So there is a distinction, an important distinction to be made between the Volunteer Force, as was, and the regular battalion. But the Territorial Force, the way the battalions were designated, made that clearer. Throughout this talk as well, I'll be referencing works of interest, reference works, which I recommend. This is the same book here. It's called His Majesty's Territorial Army, by Walter Richards, and illustrated as well by Caton Woodville. Some fantastic illustrations in there. If you've got £350 to spare, I would recommend you buy the hardback 4-volume set on the left, which you can find on Abe Books now. I'd love a hardback set, but I don't have one. I've only got the paperbacks, which are on the right. So you can buy those from Naval and Military Press. I think £48 is the cover price, but if you go to abebooks.com, and I should say I have no affiliation to Abe at all, but if you have a look there, you will find a set of those books on there for a good deal less than that. I was looking yesterday. It's a very good book, or a very good series of books. Basically, it picks up the story from the time when the Territorial Force took over from the Volunteer Force, and that list that I showed you just now of Essex units was taken from that book. So it gives you the units for each county association, some background, some history on the units as well, in some cases names people as well. So it's an invaluable work actually for the Territorial Force. So sticking with Essex and my local battalions as were, in 1914 headquartered in Chelmsford. A company was in Chelmsford, it was a Chelmsford company, and B company was as well, also in Chelmsford, and you can see the drill stations there at different locations in villages nearby. And then you have the distribution of the other companies. So there are 8 companies in total within a battalion. That was the same for the regular army as well. It was eight companies up until 1914 when it changed to 4 companies. But here at this point in time, we're talking about so from 1908 to 1914, you've got 8 companies, and they're spread around this part of Essex actually, and I'll go into a bit more detail shortly. You've got drill stations mentioned there, so you have the headquarters in these locations, and the Chelmsford headquarters used to be in Market Road. I remember taking a photo of it because it was still standing in about 1981, 82, and then it was knocked down, and there was a big Liverpool Victoria building put up in its place, but it was still there, and I have a photo of it. And some of these drill stations do still survive, and there is a couple of good websites which I'm going to recommend to you now as well. The first one is the Drillhall Project. So if you just went to Google and typed in drill halls, you'd get to it easily enough, but there's the URL. And then the other one is London Drill Halls from 1908, which I wasn't aware of again until yesterday when I was looking. The image there that I've shown is from Sudbury. I've driven past this building many times, and it shows, I can't read it actually on here, but it's one of the Volunteer Force battalions that was based in Sudbury. The building still exists, of course. That's the picture there, and there's even an indoor shooting range that was originally part of that building. It's not used anymore for health and safety reasons, but there was an indoor shooting range there. Tremendous building, and the lettering over the door is wonderful. If you Google it, if you're interested, go and say Sudbury Drill Hall, and you'll see plenty of pictures of it. So just picking up on Chelmsford again, you can see Springfield there, just above, or just slightly to north of northeast of Chelmsford. I've marked the locations on here of the different companies for A and B company, and there's a line I've just sort of drawn through. I don't know whether that's correct or not, but you can see the demarcation there. A company on the left, you've got Littleworth, Broomfield, Chelmsford, and Writtle. So that company recruited men from that area, or it had drill stations had headquartered in Chelmsford, drill stations in these other areas, and then B Company headquartered in Chelmsford, but with drill stations in Boreham, Hatfield, Peveril, Danbury. Actually, if you look at the information from the time, it says Hatfield, but it can't possibly be Hatfield because Hatfield is in Hertfordshire, and there's a Hatfield Heath, which is further to the west. Again, it's too far out, but Hatfield, Peveril makes sense because it's again, it's a reasonable size village these days, nice pretty village, and so the importance of knowing this is that if your ancestor, let's say for argument's sake, your ancestor was from Little Baddow, then the chances are that he would have joined B Company because this is where B Company was recruiting its men from. And similarly, if your ancestor was from Chignall St James, probably would have served with A Company. So that's important to know because the Territorial Force battalions were very much locally focused. Here's another example. So again, still 5th Essex Regiment. This time I'm looking at F Company. These are all the markers on the left. So you've got Thaxted, Great Barbfield, Great Dunmow, Falstead, Bocking. You can't see Bocking isn't written on there, but that's Bocking just above Braintree, and then Coggeshall. Lovely parts of Essex, so these parts of Essex all recruited men for F Company. So if you lived in Duck End or Bran End or Shalford Green, and you wanted to join the local regiment, then the 5th Essex Regiment would have been your regiment, and you probably would have gone into F Company. And then to the north east of that, you've got Gosfield, Halstead, Earlscole, and other places, and that was E Company. So very logical. These two gentlemen, I had the pleasure of interviewing them in the early 80s. The man on the left is 1858 Frederick Percy Leach, who's known as Doc Leach for some reason. I think he probably worked as a stretcher bearer, and so hence the Doc. He enlisted on the 12th of June 1913 in the 5th Essex Regiment. And then the man on the right is 2057 Bertie Leo Merkin, who enlisted on the 1st of August 1913. So I interviewed both those men when I was quite young, probably 18, I think at the time. Took their photos, and I treasure those memories and the interviews that came out of them. But the important thing here is to look at their numbers. So the regimental numbers were issued sequentially from 1st of April 1908 for most regiments. So it started from 1. Typically the CSM or the RSM from the volunteer battalion predecessor would have been given a number 1, and then senior sergeants number 2, number 3, if these men decided, of course, that they wanted to serve with the Territorial Force. And then the numbers were issued sequentially. So Frederick Percy Leach got the number 1858. So by the time he joined on the 12th of June 1913, 1,857 men had joined before him. And then Merkin, Bertie Leo Merkin, who enlisted not that long after, it was about 6 weeks afterwards, 1st of August 1913, he got the number 2057. So in that time, between the 12th of June 1913 and the 1st of August 1913, you can see the number of men that would have enlisted. Take 1858 away from 2057, and you've got the number of men. There's a couple of hundred men. So you do see this with some battalions. They go through some regiments. They go through recruiting spurts, and obviously the 5th Essex Regiment had a recruiting spurt at the time, because to recruit that number of men in such a short space of time is quite unusual. But what it does tell you is that if your ancestor, your 5th Essex Regiment ancestor, had a number between 1858 and 2057, he must have joined the regiment or that battalion between the 12th of June 1913 and the 1st of August 1913. And if you've seen my regimental numbers talk and looked at my Army Service Numbers website, then that will all be very familiar to you, the way that numbers are issued and how you can work out when your ancestor joined a particular regiment. Fred Leach, the man who on the left in the previous photo, has some surviving papers which you can access on Findmypast, and this is one of the key papers that you'll find in soldiers' service records. It's Army Form B103, Casualty Form Active Service. It's to be read alongside attestation papers. It's a very important document because you get lots of detail on there. I've just shown the top part of it, but it will give you his, in this case, it gives you the different regiments he served with, his name and terms of service, etc. And I've just highlighted a few bits on here. So first thing to notice is you've got B Company there. I'm sure that is B Company of the Essex Regiment. He did go on to serve with the 21st Battalion of the King's Royal Rifle Corps, but he was from Chelmsford, and as I've just shown you, A and B companies were the 5th Essex Regiment companies for Chelmsford. And so I think that's probably a reference to B Company, 5th Essex Regiment. You've got his term of enlistment there, 4 years. He joined up on the 12th of June 1913, which I've already talked about. And there at the top, you've got his regimental number as well, which is 5/1852. Now, these regimental prefixes were irregularly used. It was encouraged that regiments should prefix numbers with the number of the battalion, and that's the case here. But it wasn't always the case. It wasn't always used. Helpful when you do see it on records, because you can immediately identify the battalion a man served with. But and the problem is with Territorial Force battalions, the problem I say, but it can be a conundrum, is that they all started numbering from 1, or for the most part they all started numbering from 1, and we'll come to that again shortly. So here's Territorial Force attestation paper, or part of it. I've just done a bit of cutting and pasting here, and I just wanted to do this to show you the terms that the men were signing up for. So for each one of these, question 15 is the key point here. So this man, James Boyle Laxton, joining the 4th Lincolnshire Regiment, got the number 1094. I can't remember. I think it was 1909 that he joined up. So the first part of that question is, are you willing to be attested for the term of 4 years? And it gives you the name of the regiment. Do you understand that you're going to have to do some training? Yes. That in addition, you're going to have to attend drills each year. It says for not less than 8 or more than 15 days altogether every year. And that was a requirement for men joining the TF. They had to go out to annual camp. And in fact, in 1914, many of them were returning from camp, and in some cases just setting out for camp, when war was declared. So they either had to turn around in the train and go back to where they come from to be mobilized, or they came back early from their camp. 15C says that if you fail to attend the number of drills required, you could be fined up to £5. When a proclamation has been issued in case of imminent national danger, you'll be liable to it be embodied, that is, readied for service. And this one's important as well, which you also see on regular soldiers' papers, that if your term of 4 years expires when a proclamation ordering the Army Reserve to be called out is in force, you may be required to prolong your service for a further 12 months. And then the final question here, the final point here, that you'll be liable to serve in any place in the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom bit is important because the men of the TF were only engaged to serve in the United Kingdom. They weren't engaged to serve anywhere else. They were engaged to serve for home defence only. Here's another page from this man's service record, just to illustrate the importance of these documents, really, as historical documents, because you've got here the fact that he joined up in 1909, January 1909, and then underwent his preliminary training. And then you've got all the places that he went to camp at. So you've got Hindlow, Loughborough, Aberystwyth, and the dates as well. So that's terrific information. I mean, you can find that information elsewhere in the camps they went to, but it's good information generally to know where the Lincolnshire Regiment, the 4th Lincolnshire Regiment, went to camp, because if that's on his record, it'll be on every other man's record as well. That's where the camp was, and if he's your ancestor, then it's great to see that detail about him in particular. So I mentioned the service in the United Kingdom only, and that presented the men of the Territorial Force with and the people in Britain with a problem when Britain went to war in 1914, because they had all these men who could be called upon, but they could only be called upon to serve overseas if they signed a separate piece of paper to say, yes, I'm happy for you to send me overseas. And that's exactly what this paper is. Army Form E624, I think. My eyesight, it's not so great. But anyway, it's an Imperial service obligation, and it says that an officer or man of the Territorial Force agrees to serve overseas, and then you've got the man's details and you've got his signature on there. And then on the back, it gives you the conditions of service. And one of those conditions is that a badge will be awarded to each individual accepting liability for service outside the United Kingdom. And there you can see the badge at the bottom. It's a silver badge. I've got a few of those in my collection. And it says the badge may be worn when in uniform on the right breast of the officer or man, so long as the liability continues. And it was worn as a badge of pride by the men. They were proud to be doing their bit for king and country. Most men who joined up signed this document straight away. It's almost part of the attestation process. Other men signed it retrospectively. But you see these documents very frequently in soldiers' service records from the First World War era. And here are some men wearing their badges. So you can see on the left, Donald Banks, again, who I had the pleasure of interviewing when he was an elderly man, 85, 86, I think he was at the time, when I first met him, from Lincolnshire, lovely accent, lovely rich Lincolnshire accent. He would have been 16 when that photo was taken. He was born in January 1899, and he joined up in January 1915, and that photo would have been taken shortly afterwards. He was partially blinded temporarily, thankfully, in March 1915. Came back to England, recuperated, and then I think he was discharged, but then re-enlisted later on and went back to France. Had a real lovely accent, as I say, and could really tell a tale or two. So his Lincolnshire regiment, wearing his badge. The other men on this slide I don't know, but you can tell from the middle slide that those men are Royal Warwickshire Regiment by the antelope on the man in the middle there. At the back is particularly clear, so it's definitely Royal Warwickshire Regiment. Territorial Force, that identifies them as TF, thanks to the man on the left. You can see his badge. It's probably in barracks as well by looking at the pegs behind and the caps hanging up. That looks to me to be a barrack room. And then the man on the right is Royal Engineers, judging by his cap badge, and again Territorial Force because of his badge on his lapel, on his breast pocket. And again, more men here. I think these are Royal Welsh Fusiliers, photographed in Ingatstone in Essex, but so they come quite a way. I don't know when the photo is dated, but again, you can see the badges above their breast pockets, and you can read the insignia on the lapels as well. And I think it was 7th RWF. I can't remember offhand. But a great way of identifying men as being in the Territorial Force. If you see that badge above their pocket, that's Territorial Force, and they've volunteered for overseas service. So here's some reading for you as well. In addition to those books I mentioned earlier, the set of 4 books, I've got all of these books. The Territorial Force Yearbook on the left was issued in the first year of issue. That was 1909 it was published, and then the second one was published in 1910. The second one is quite hard to come by. I've had mine a couple of years now. Not cheap to get hold of, but it's full of very useful information, which we'll come to shortly. And then the one on the right is by the incomparable Ray Westlake, who's published no end of books. But this is a very, very useful book as well, which again we'll come to shortly. Grab it if you can. The Abe Books has copies of the 1909 book. I think I paid £50 for mine from Australia many years ago. You can get it cheaper than that. Again, Ray Westlake has republished this one, and you can get it online for about £15, I think, when I was looking yesterday. The Territorial Force Yearbook, the second one, I haven't seen other copies of that available, and Ray's book, Abe Book, also has copies. Again, not so long ago, the asking price for that was about £50, but it's less than that. So be quick. If you're interested at all, I would say those are essential. Fascinating books. This one is from the 1909 edition, the green cover one, which I showed you a minute ago. So I just took some snapshots from it. So on the left, all this is, I just find it fascinating, really. Recruits are enlisted for 4 years. The age limits for enlistment are 17 to 35 inclusive. Then you've got the rights and duties of territorial soldiers. Then you've got the standards for recruits at the bottom, standards of height. So yeomanry, 5'3" and upwards. Artillery, 5'3" and upwards. Mountain gunners, 5'7" and upwards. Garrison artillery, 5'6". The detail is minute and absolutely fascinating. As I say, you can read here that a man becomes exempt from jury service if he claims the exemption. So there's all that information, and then on the right hand side, in the middle and the right, I've taken these snapshots from the Essex Regiment. So you've got the Essex Regiment Eastern Command. It gives you the district, and it gives you all the names of the people representing who are on this county association. So you've got the chairman, the president, you've got military members, you've got representative members, and then you've got underneath, again in regimental precedence order, all the different units, the yeomanry, Essex Yeomanry, where they were headquartered. If I click onto the next slide, you'll see some detail. So I go on to here for the 5th Essex Regiment. So it tells you here, Officer Commanding Lieutenant Colonel P. Adams, VD. So that's a volunteer force decoration there. Then you've got other named people. You've got how many people were, what the strength of the battalion was, the number of officers, the number of men, the former unit, in this case the 2nd Volunteer Battalion Essex Regiment. You've got ranges where there are firing ranges. So that information earlier I showed you with drill stations, this is in addition to that. You've got firing ranges here listed at Sandon, Middlewick, Brantham, Maplestead, Dunmow. It's all listed, and you have best shots, the sergeant, Sergeant Walls, B Company, and Lance Corporal J Tippins of D Company. You've got where they were at camp, the badge. There's a lot of information. It's packed in to that tiny paragraph, and you have that for every single Territorial Force unit that was around. So no, if that doesn't sell that book to you, I don't know what will. But it's a terrific book. It was only published in those 2 years, 1909 and 1910, and I do regard them as essential. I keep them with our arm's length of where I'm sitting now. I can reach onto the shelf and I can get them both, and Ray Westlake's book as well. It's essential reading. And this is Ray's book, published in 1988. Again, I've just taken some shots from the Essex Regiment, so you can see there, 2/3 of the way down the middle page, 4th Battalion Essex Regiment, giving the details of where the headquarters are and where the different drill stations were, and then going on 5th Battalion, 6th Battalion, etc. So you can see the 4th and 5th were well spread throughout Essex. When you get to the 6th and 7th, the 6th Battalion was West Ham for the most part, apart from H Company, which was at Prittlewell, and the 7th Battalion was Walthamstow for the most part. Well, actually, entirely Walthamstow. H Company had a drill station at Chingford. And then the 8th Battalion, which was a cyclist battalion latterly, in that earlier slide I showed you, it was the Essex and Suffolk Regiment, but by this stage it was just the Essex Regiment. That had headquarters at Colchester, and then had companies really scattered throughout Essex, actually, from Leighton through to Dunmow to Malden to Coggeshall. There was a wide spread of stations. But again, Ray's book is very good. It's all in summary like this, and I do refer to it a lot. So Essex Regiment Territorial Force recruitment patterns. I've mentioned this already about how the numbers were allocated. All Essex Regiment battalions started numbering from 1 in April 1908. They didn't all do that, actually. I mean, some battalions were spread across different counties, actually, and administered by different county associations. So in which case, and often you find this with the Welsh and some of the Scottish regiments, in which case you'll have different number series within a battalion. And for some of the Welsh, I think Royal Welsh Fusiliers are a good example. There might be 3 different number series for a single battalion, because that battalion was administered by multiple county associations. But in this case, this is quite simple for Essex. They all start numbering from 1 on the 1st of April 1908, and then just keep on their merry way, recruiting men over the years until you get to August 1914, and you're up in the 2000s for most of those. So on this slide, I'm just looking at the 1st and 2nd battalions, the 3rd Special Reserve Battalion, and then the TF battalions. So some of you will have seen this slide before on my regimental numbers talk, but just showing you where the numbers were at. So again, using this as a guide, if your man's number was, let's say he served with the 6th Essex and his number was 1600, you know that he's joined up before the 6th of August 1914. That was the logic. That was, and this is from an Excel spreadsheet that I have maintained. So the impact of August 1914, well, that picture says it all, really. No further words required. You can see the impact. It's well known how men flocked to the colours, wanting to do their bit. There was a combination of reservists who were obliged to show up, but of course thousands and thousands and thousands of volunteers as well. And whilst Kitchener's appeal is well known, and the PALS battalions and how they were set up, and the service battalions, how they were formed, is well known, it should also be remembered that many men flocked to the Territorial Force battalions as well, and they, like everyone else, was completely overwhelmed. So in order to accommodate these new men, new second line or reserve units were formed from August 1914. So again, using the 5th Essex Regiment as an example, a second 5th Essex Regiment was formed in October 1914. Of course, they couldn't call it the 2nd 5th Essex Regiment. There was only one 5th Essex Regiment. So what they did was say, okay, well, this new battalion would be a reserve battalion, but would designate it with a 2 in front of the 5. So it became the 2nd 5th, and the original 5th battalion became the 1st 5th. So you had the 1st 5th and the 2nd 5th battalion. And in May 1915, a 2nd Reserve Battalion was formed, and that was designated as the 3rd 5th or 2nd Reserve Battalion. And in April 1916, that simply became the 5th Reserve Battalion. So all men joining these different battalions were issued with regimental numbers from the same regimental number series that had been used by the 5th Battalion. So there's no difference there. Regardless of whether you were 1st 5th, 2nd 5th, or 3rd 5th, you all have the number issued from that series. So again, going back to the Essex County Association, using here an example of the 2nd East Anglian ammunition column. This man here standing at the gate, he's got 2nd East Anglian Field Ambulance, Field Artillery Brigade ammunition column office. So the original unit had been the 2nd East Anglian ammunition column, and then by the time he joined, a reserve unit had been set up and it was designated as the 2nd. So that's the logic. Territorial Force renumbering of 1917. The TF and yeomanry units were allocated with new 5 or 6 digit numbers from specific number blocks. I've taken this information from the Long Trail website. The names in red are battalions that were set up after 1914, but these first 5 here existed before 1914. So the idea was that men were issued with men serving with a TF were issued with new numbers because there had been so much duplication in battalions with multiple regiments and multiple battalions within regiments, all issuing men with number 1 beginning in April 1901. You can imagine what in April 1908 rather. You can imagine what the duplication would have looked like. And so to try and improve matters, everybody was issued with a new number. Everybody serving in the Territorial Force was issued with a new number from January 1917. And that numbering process went on for 2 or 3 months, but it was begun in January 1917. So the 4th Essex Regiment was issued with numbers in the block that you can see there, and the 5th was in the block following that, and so on and so forth. So it's very logical, and it would have been sound had not the same numbers in the same ranges also been issued to other regiments. So you can see those are the numbers for the Essex Regiment. The Suffolk Regiment also got similar numbers. So 4th Suffolk had numbers from 200001 to 240000. And the Norfolk Regiment as well. And the Sherwood Foresters, and all of them, London Regiment, they all were issued with numbers in the same block. So there was still duplication of regimental numbers. But the 6-digit numbers were issued in order of longevity of service. And so by the time those numbers were issued in 1917, the longest serving man in a battalion would have been given the lowest number. So in this case, and again, I've plotted this on Excel spreadsheets that I have. So you've got the 4th Battalion there. The man who was issued with the number 2011, he would have been a long-serving man who would have originally enlisted in 1908. And by the time he was issued with that number, there was only 10 men serving in the battalion who'd served longer than he had. That's what that number tells you. And so you can see how those numbers were issued, how they were issued throughout the months that followed. So you can tie back, or the months and years that followed, you could tie back, for instance, for 1913, for the 4th Battalion, 200-261, that number ties back to 1913, to August 1913. So again, a good way of tracing back when your ancestor would have served. You might remember this from those of you who listened to what I had to say last month. Private John Cox died on the 1st of October 1916, but he has a 6-digit Territorial Force number. He has that because between October 1916 and January 1917, when the new numbers were issued, he was still officially regarded as missing, and thus he was issued with a new number in January 1917. He wasn't officially noted as dead. And the 20th London Regiment number range was that 63001 to 650000. And you can see his number there, 633436, falls right within that range. So that's why he's got that 6-digit number. So don't be surprised if you find your ancestor serving the Territorial Force have been killed before these numbers were issued. The reason he has that number is that he was missing at the time the number was issued. For reference, good reference on the renumbering of the Territorial Force, then have a look at the Long Trail website. Always a good bet for research in the First World War. I just went into the search bar and typed in renumbering and came up with those 2 results straight away. And I have to blow my own trumpet as well. Look at my Army Service Numbers blog as well. So just go to Google, type in Army Service Numbers blog, and you'll come to it. This is an extract from my last post, which was on the 7th Battalion, Devonshire Regiment, which is Cyclist Battalion. I've added reference for all the regular battalions, and the cavalry, and a good deal of others as well. I'm working my way through Territorial Force units as well at the moment. So I'm pulling information from the Territorial yearbooks, which I shared with you earlier on, and also using numbers as well. So you could tell, for instance, that if your man was number 500 and he lived in, let's say, Great Dunmow, that he would have enlisted at such and such a time and probably served with this company. That's the idea. So have a look at that. There's 600 plus posts that I've written in the last 12 years or so. In 1921, the Territorial Army replaced the Territorial Force. There was another act that came into place. It was the Territorial Army and Militia Act of 1921, and it was renamed in 1921 as the Territorial Army. All Territorial Army recruits were now required to take the General Service Obligation, and they could be deployed overseas in combat operations. So that saved the need for having to fill out those lengthy forms, or having to sign an obligation, rather. There was a general reorganisation of territorial and yeomanry units as well, which included the reduction in the number of yeomanry units with horses, because of course the army is becoming mechanised by this stage. And being 1921, if your ancestor was still serving in the army at this point in time, he'll have records with the MOD. The records won't be published on Findmypast or elsewhere for the most part for this period of time, because they are still with the MOD. Any records post 1920 are with the MOD, and you'll have to write to them for further information. So that's it. Thank you for listening. I hope what I have had to say will be useful. I'm ending with a photo of more unknown soldiers for me, taken in Cheltenham, but the man second left, you can see on his breast pocket, there's that overseas Imperial Service badge is just about visible. So that's a good enough clue that those men are all from a Territorial Force unit of the Royal Field Artillery. That's it. Thanks again. Please post questions and I will get round to them, and I'll answer them either later today or in the days that follow.